My name is Britta, and I worked with Aaliyah, Justin, and Kyle on this project. We are all engineering students at UW-Madison. Today, we will be talking about the most deadly industrial disaster to date. We will talk about who was to blame, who could be held accountable, and what actions could be taken to reduce future risks. We will look at the problem through a utilitarian and contractarianistic approach, and we will question how risks and costs can outweigh safety measures. And with that, Aaliyah will start us off with a little background information on the Bohpal disaster.
Hello, my name's Leah Gersten, and I'm a second-year environmental engineering student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the Bohpal disaster. So what was the Bohpal disaster? It was actually the world's most deadly industrial disaster to date. And it was caused by the US-owned company called Union Carbide, which owned a chemical pesticide plant in Bohpal, India. And in 1984, water leaked into a methyl isocyanate tank, releasing 40 tons of the deadly gas to Bohpal, India. About 20,000 people have died since, and hundreds of thousands of people are still feeling effects of the toxic gas today. Although there were many safety measures in place, these didn't work for a couple of reasons. It was either employee negligence or companies' decisions in order to reduce costs. Some of these were that the vent gas scrubber was turned off, the water curtain was not set at its proper height, so it wasn't set high enough in order to contain the gas. The refrigeration system to cool down the gas was turned off in order to reduce costs, which was a company decision. The flare tower was missing a pipe for maintenance, which was employee negligence. And right before the gas was released, there were alarming pressure rates that were due to the water being leaked into the tank. And employees ignored this, thinking that the pressure valves were malfunctioning. This meant that the switch valve was not operated and the gas wasn't released into an empty tank that was right beside the tank that was malfunctioning. So who's really accountable for the Bohpal disaster? Well, there were a couple of different people accused. At first, 7 Indian employees of the plant were accused of causing death by negligence. This could have been from ignoring the pressure valves to not setting the correct height on the water containment system. The US CEO of the company, Warren Anderson, was also arrested on account of corporate negligence. This could have been from his decision to reduce costs by altering the safety containments. Next, the corporate at whole was accused of underinvestment, equipment, regulations, and safety audits that were not regulated well enough. And this could have been in part from the Indian and US government as well. The last option was potential sabotage. Since there was a lot of water released into the tanks, it seemed that maybe this could have been a sabotage as well. We don't know the true person to accuse for the Bohpal disaster, but it seemed like the corporate negligence was the thing decided in the end. The effects of the Bohpal disaster are still being felt today. There are ongoing deaths, there are birth defects, and the toxic waste is causing Bohpal to become an environmentally unsafe area. In fact, it's thought that maybe the toxic waste has contaminated the water and it's unsafe to drink anymore. There are also continuing protests from Bohpal, India to hold people accountable, especially Warren Anderson, but these mostly stopped in 2014 when he died. There have been many laws enacted and an industrial boom since then. These laws have been to prevent further gas contamination and to help victims of the gas leak to gain money and have health care.
In an incident as tragic as the Bhopal disaster was, it does not happen on its own as an accident, but can be caused by a series of decisions that happened way before the incident actually took place. For the Bhopal disaster, there are many ethical issues that occurred prior to the explosion that could have been prevented. Some of these issues are neglect by the company, underfunding by the company as well, improper maintenance by the workers, and directives from Union Carbide itself, as well as many others that will be discussed later. I'm going to look at this from two lenses, the utilitarian approach and the contractarian approach, and show where the ethical issues in this incident occurred and how things could have been changed for things to happen differently. First, let's look at the incident from the utilitarian approach. The utilitarian approach states that you must act for the greatest intentions of the group. The group can be any people, so in this case it will be the people surrounding the Bhopal plant in India and all those affected by the explosion that happened. In this situation, CEO Warren Anderson and other workers of Union Carbide did not care about the people surrounding the plant and only cared about their profit margin and other financial reasons. If proper care was taken, lives could have been saved. However, the company had neglect and improper maintenance, as well as other issues that led to the explosion and the needless taking of lives and property. In this, according to the utilitarian approach, the CEO and other workers are guilty, and their malpractice has hurt the people of India and caused needless tragedy to occur. Now, let's look at the Bhopal disaster from the contractarianism approach. The contractarianism approach states the society is a contract of everyone in it following a set of rules. In real life, this set of rules is laws, and society is the people of a state or nation governed by the government. In the Bhopal disaster, by ignoring maintenance and causing death, Union Carbide broke said rules. Companies and people have a reasonable agreement to keep people alive and cause issues on the scale of Bhopal disaster to all of their power due to how bad in nature it is. These workers failed society as well as the CEO and company, which means that they are guilty in the contractarianism approach, and as what happened, were charged with manslaughter by the Indian government.
With such a terrible disaster, it's no surprise that the amount of risks involved are nearly endless. In an attempt to summarize the risks, I'll categorize them into two main categories: financial and social. We'll consider financial risks to be anything involving a monetary repercussion, and social risks to be involving anything involving the people in the company. To begin, in 1989, Union Carbide paid $470 million to settle litigation. In today's money, that's roughly $907 million. The Indian Supreme Court also requested UCC to fund a hospital in Bhopal to treat the victims of the Bhopal disaster, which they eventually agreed to. This hospital was estimated to be around $17 million. All of this was paid only 5 years after the disaster, after UC continued to deny responsibility. They only paid once the Indian Supreme Court got involved. Speaking of the government, not only was there $500,000 in settlement costs from UC, but the government of Madhya Pradesh also distributed the equivalent of $11 million for victim aid. In total, 574,000 people received aid. Both Union Carbide and the local government had to spend massive sums of money in response to this disaster. It's clear that if the corporate negligence had not occurred, the disaster would likely not have happened or been nearly as extreme. Proper safety audits and safety systems, like the refrigeration, for example, could have prevented the disaster from being so massive and prevented the Union Carbide Company from spending massive sums of money. It also would have left millions of taxpayer dollars in the government's budget for things other than disaster relief, especially disaster relief due to corporate negligence. Prior to the accident, Union Carbide was making around $170 million in revenue. If they had managed to continue operations, they certainly would have continued to make millions. As far as social risks go, the over 500,000 people in the surrounding towns were the first to be affected. Thousands of people were killed shortly following the disaster, and hundreds of thousands of people suffered from the long-term impacts. Among those, eye and lung disease is super prevalent. The UC plant continued to be a source of groundwater contamination in the surrounding areas. Not only this, but Carbide's reputation and ability to do business was likely ruined in an instant. There's no amount of damage recovery that can wipe this massive sign of negligence from anyone's mind. If Union Carbide were to continue to do business, everyone would associate the thousands of deaths with them. And speaking of UC's former employees, many of them met legal action. While their cases were dismissed in U.S. courts, they were transferred to Indian courts and were left with sentences of death by negligence. This comes with a $2,000 fine and a 2-year prison sentence. While all of these employees were released on bail, it doesn't change the fact that these Union Carbide employees now have a permanent sign of corporate negligence on their criminal records. It's easy to imagine that an employee looking for someone to run their plant would avoid anyone with a sentence of death by negligence, especially one brought about by the largest industrial disaster to date. In summary, if the proper steps had been taken, this terrible disaster may not have ever happened. Union Carbide as it was in the 80s is no more. Many of the employees responsible are retired or have passed. However, the impacts of this tragedy can still be felt today in Bohpal.
All right, I just wanted to thank you guys again for your time today. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, unmute and ask them, or raise your hand, whatever you're most comfortable with, and we look forward to clarifying any lasting questions that you have. Thank you.